Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Learn with Google webinar, Managing AdWords Accounts at Scale, Go Bigger Faster with AdWords Scripts. My name is Katie Miller, and I'm a Product Marketing Manager for Search Ads. I'll be your moderator today. Your presenter will be Kevin Winter, who's a member of our AdWords Developer Relations team. Before we get started, I wanted to cover a few quick housekeeping items. The first is, feel free to submit questions, including any technical issues, throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget on the left-hand side of the console. And it actually looks like we're already getting some, so thank you very much. If questions are specific to something being discussed, we'll share the answers with you during the presentation. Otherwise, we'll go through all of the questions at the end, or as many as we can get to during the Q&A session. Second, you'll also see that there's a Twitter gadget. Feel free to tweet about the webinar using the hashtag GoogWebinar. That's GOOGWEBINAR. For the best viewing experience, we do recommend that you maximize your browser window as well as the presentation within the audience console. To expand the presentation, you can either click on the green button in the upper right corner or drag the lower right corner out. This webinar will be recorded, and a link will be sent to you after the event. And finally, as a reminder, please be sure to turn off pop-up blockers to make sure that there are no viewing issues. And now that the housekeeping is out of the way, let's get started. Over the last couple of quarters, we've hosted a number of webinars focused on how you can go bigger faster using account management tools such as AdWords scripts that offer scale and efficiency. For example, some of you may have joined us back in March when we shared some best practices for efficiently creating, optimizing, and automating campaigns. Then in July, we provided a product overview and use cases for scripts, as well as other tools, to help you choose the right one to meet your goals. After each session, you shared that you'd really like us to follow up with a more in-depth live demonstration of these tools, and that's what we're really excited to bring you today, with the focus being on how you can spend more of your time innovating and growing by using AdWords scripts. Here's a quick look at what we'll be covering today. I'm going to start off with a quick background on what AdWords scripts is, some of the benefits and best practices. The next is Kevin is going to go through very, very detailed examples of the features in AdWords scripts, as well as walk you step by step through a sample script. And then at the end, we will make sure to save plenty of time for Q&A. Just as a quick reminder, this webinar is targeted towards advanced AdWords users that do have some basic JavaScript or other programming language experience. We will be going through examples of JavaScript, and we want to make sure that you do have enough experience with that you're able to follow along with the webinar. Now a little bit of a background on scripts. Just want to make sure to level set. I'm sure many of you are on this because you have some familiarity with AdWords scripts. But if there are some of you on the call who are experienced AdWords users but are looking for an efficient account management solution, I wanted to give you a little bit of a background on this tool. AdWords Scripts is a new tool that in the last couple of weeks just recently launched globally. And it's right within the AdWords web interface. And it enables you to write simple JavaScript programs to bring, for example, to bring your own data to campaign changes, build your own intuition and business logic into your campaign management, as well as customize reports the way that you want them. A little bit of background on why we built scripts. It was built with the 80% goal in mind. We thought about what are the 80% of the most common tasks that you perform as advertisers, and how could we build a tool that can make it easy and automated to do these tasks, some of them being creating keywords, text ads, and adjusting bids. And so hopefully what you'll see through this training is scripts is something that enables you to very easily create automated scripts that will enable you to make these changes, as well as many more. Here's a little bit about the benefits of scripts. The first is scripts run on Google servers, so there's no hosting required on your end. It has a simple, easy-to-use interface, which we'll see in a moment. For those of you with the JavaScript or programming experience, hopefully by the end of this webinar, you'll be able to go off and actually start writing some scripts for yourself. For those who are unsure whether or not you should use scripts versus the AdWords API, this is much simpler to get started than the API. At the same time, it offers you a great deal more flexibility than automated rules. And a really exciting thing is that you can use external data inputs when making decisions about changes. And this external data can be anything from your own inventory to third-party data such as weather or information from the U.S. Geological Society, any kind of third-party data sources that you have access to. Here's a little bit about what you can do with scripts, and I'll leave the details to Kevin, but just to give a quick overview. The first is, again, we mentioned that it provides much more flexibility than automated rules. So if you're currently using automated rules but feel somewhat limited, you can create custom rules through scripts. And here's an example of one. If your clicks are decreasing 5% week over week for the last 4 weeks, you can write a script telling AdWords to increase your bids by 10%. The second, again, is you can integrate with external data. So you could use Google spreadsheets to read your inventory data and use that to change bids or pause certain keywords or ad groups. And finally, if you have very particular data that you would like in reports to make decisions, you can write a script that emails you a keyword performance report daily by exporting it into a Google spreadsheet. Where can you find scripts? So to get started, you would go to the left navigation within your AdWords account and click on Automation and then Scripts. And the view on the right is what you'll see once you click on Scripts. Here, you'll not only be able to click on the green button to create a new one, but if you've already written scripts, you'll be able to edit and run them from this interface. When you click on Create Script, this is the view you'll see. It will be pre-populated with an example script, so when you're getting started, this is a great way to learn what some of the possibilities are. If you're unsure exactly what you want to write about and you'd like to see some examples, you can then select Show Examples for Ideas. And this is the view you'll see. And actually the bulk of today's session will be Kevin walking through some of the examples that you'll see here. Once you've created a script, we strongly recommend that you then click Preview so that you have a sense of what changes will be made to your account once you run that script. And then finally, once you preview it, you'll see the blue button that has you run script now. So that's just a quick overview of what scripts is, benefits, use cases, as well as where you can find the scripts tool within your AdWords account and what the interface will look like, and the step-by-step of how you can create, preview, and run scripts. Now what I'm going to do, this is the exciting part of the webinar, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin, and he's going to go through in detail the features as well as walk you step-by-step through a sample script. Kevin, take it away.
Thanks, Katie. In order to use AdWords scripts with your account, you need to tell AdWords what objects in your campaign that you want to work with. So to do that, use a selector. A selector is a way of selecting which particular campaigns or keywords that you want to work with. You can use things such as conditions, you can change the order that they'll appear, limit the number of results, or specify a date range if you're comparing using stats. This is a very basic selector. We call AdWords app, which tells AdWords scripts that we want to look at our AdWords campaign data. We say .keywords, which says we would like to build a keywords selector. And in this case, we just call get. This will return back an iterator, which I'll explain in a short while, that would give me every single keyword that's in my account, one at a time. Here, we're adding some conditions to the script, to the selector. We're adding the condition clicks are greater than 0 and impressions are greater than 0. If you add multiple conditions to your selector, they will be ANDed together so that you will only see a result if all of the conditions are satisfied. Here, we're telling the selector we'd like to see our objects in a certain order. For example, by clicks in ascending order or by impressions in descending order. It will order first by the primary, the first type of ordering that you specify, and then by the secondary ordering if it needs a tiebreaker. Here, we can specify a limit. This is very useful when using an ordering, so you could look at the top 50 keywords or the bottom 50 performing text ads. You can also specify a date range to say, I want to look at the ads over the last 7 days or the last month, for example, that have certain performance metrics. Iterators are very simple objects. You can call the hasNext method, which will return back true if there are more objects to read, and you can call next, get a reference to that next object. After calling next, the iterator will be looking at the next object in the sequence, but you can operate on the keyword that you just got a reference to. Scripts allow you to retrieve and modify many different objects. For example, you can create, retrieve, update, and delete keywords and text ads. However, for campaigns and ad groups, you can currently only retrieve and update them. Here's an example of working with a campaign entity. As a convenience, we provide these helper methods, ad groups, ads, and keywords, which will automatically give you all of the keywords, ads, or ad groups that are associated with this campaign. This is a quick and easy way to narrow down on a subset of your keywords by finding the campaign you want and then calling .keywords and then adding extra conditions on top to find specific keywords within a specific campaign. You can also get a lot of different values from the campaign, such as the current budget, its status if it's deleted, enabled, or paused, as well as campaign statistics, which we'll talk about in a little bit. For a campaign, we allow you to modify the status, pause, or enable it, as well as update the budget. Ad groups are very similar to campaigns. In addition to the ads and keywords, though, you can also call .adparams to get a list of the ad params that have been configured for this ad group. Ad parameters, which is a recent feature added to Adwords scripts, allows you to specify dynamic values that will be inserted when your ad is triggered by certain keywords. You can specify numerical values, such as money or simple numbers, to be inserted into your ad text. Check out our documentation site under the links, which has a tutorial explaining how to accomplish this. Ad groups will also let you check various fields, such as the keyword max CPC, which is the default keyword bid, the status. You can also get the campaign very quickly if you're dealing with an ad group and you just need to get back to the campaign. There's a convenience method right there, as well as getting ad group stats. Again, we'll go in that more detail in a little bit. You can also pause, enable, and set the default keyword bid for ad groups. For keywords, you have a lot more things that you can, a lot more fields that you can retrieve. Approval status, destination URL, etc. And as well as checking the status of the keyword. There's also helper methods provided that let you get the ad group as well as the campaign and the stats. For keywords, you can modify a few different things, such as setting an ad parameter, setting a destination URL, or a max CPC. Please note that if you want to update the keyword, the actual keyword, the text, and or the match type, you will actually have to remove and add a brand new keyword in order to make that change. This is actually what the AdWords UI does behind the scenes for you. And you might notice this when you see that the statistics for the old keyword don't exist anymore. or stop at that point. Text ads also have a bunch of fields that you can access. The description, destination URL, etc. You can easily get the ad group and the campaign, as well as the stats. And you can pause and remove the ad as well. Similarly to keywords, you're going to have to remove and then re-add the text ad if you want to make any changes to things such as the description or the headline. You can retrieve statistics for a keyword, campaign, ad group, or text ad by calling getStats4, and you can specify a time period such as all time, last month, yesterday, or even a custom time period. Here, I'm retrieving the stats for the first quarter of this year. You can get a lot of useful fields from the stats object, such as the average CPC, your clicks, costs, some conversion information, impressions, etc. Currently, these are the only statistics that are available, but we're always evaluating and seeing what statistics are most requested by customers to decide what to expose next. Next, I'm going to walk through a sample script showing you how to step-by-step create a script that accomplishes a task. This is a mock-up of creating a brand new sample script from scratch. First, we create function main. In JavaScript, you use the keyword function to say, this is a function, a piece of code that will then accomplish some task. Main is a keyword that Adwords scripts use to know which function should be executed by default when the script runs. You can break your code into multiple smaller steps called functions and then execute them from other pieces. This allows you to reuse the code without having to do too much in copying and pasting. By choosing main, it will always execute this part of the code first. The curly braces denote the rest of the function body. It's always best practice to use the curly braces. Here, we're creating a iterator that will go all over the keywords in my account. Right now, it's just going to give me all the keywords in my account. So let's add a few conditions to that. Let's only get the keywords that have had clicks that are greater than 0. So only keywords that are actively being clicked on. For date range yesterday means that I'm looking for keywords that had clicks at some point during yesterday. And now I'm going to get an iterator so I can look at those keywords that had at least one click yesterday, one by one. Now I'm constructing a while loop. In JavaScript, the while keyword will test what is in parentheses to say, is this a true value? If it is a true value, it will continue to loop. When that value is no longer true, it will break out of this loop and allow you to do something else. This is a great way to evaluate an iterator step by step. Keywords.hasNext. Keywords is our iterator. HasNext is saying, is there another object for me to look at? So while I have not reached the end of the objects that match my selector, it's going to continue to return true. As soon as I've retrieved that last object, this will return false, the loop will end, and now my script will also end. Here, we get a reference to the keyword in this iterator, so we can actually do something with it. Now, we're using an if statement. An if statement allows me to say, if this condition is true, please take some action. In this case, we're comparing keyword.getMaxCPC to keyword.getTopOfPage CPC. And if the max CPC is different from the top page CPC, we can make a change. So for example, we could set the keyword max CPC to be the top of page CPC if, for example, the max CPC was greater than the top of page CPC, which is something a lot higher than it needs to be. Once our max CPC has been set to that of the top of page CPC, we know we're going to get our keyword on the top of the page. It's no longer needed to bid any higher than that. So this is an example script that will go through all of your keywords that have had any activity in the last day, any clicks, and it will change the bids to our logic, which in this case happens to be comparing max CPC and top of page CPC. You could very easily write logic that would check other conditions compared to the keyword, perhaps use other statistics or other time periods to then perform your logic and how you want to manage your campaign. There are other services and features available to you when using AdWords scripts. For example, you can read and write to Google Spreadsheets. You can open it by ID, which is in the URL of the spreadsheet, or you can create a brand new one, such as if you have a script and you wanted to create a report by populating a Google spreadsheet with your account data. You can also send email specifying the recipient, subject, body, and it's even possible to add attachments to this object. So for example, you could create a text file that contains your report so you can instantly see it inside the email that you receive. Check out the documentation for more details. You can also retrieve HTTP resources. URL Fetch App is a tool that will allow you to retrieve any file available on the internet. You can also specify custom HTTP headers as well as provide a payload if you need to access an authenticated resource, for example, something that is behind a username and password on your company's website, or, for example, if you would like to post your file or any sort of text to another source. This will allow you to do simple integrations between AdWords scripts and possibly a third-party website or even your own servers if you wanted to perform some sort of an integration. Scripts can also be scheduled. You can schedule them to happen and execute at a later date in the future, or you can set them to schedule to execute regularly, for example, daily, weekly, or monthly. There are some limitations with AdWords scripts. We're constantly trying to expand and make sure that you have a very stable environment. But for the meantime, here are some simple limits that you should keep in mind. You will only be able to run a script for up to 30 minutes before it will stop. You can read up to 100,000 entities, and that would be 50,000 per individual iterator and 100,000 total. You can also create up to 100,000 keywords. For many people, this represents a very large, substantial portion of their account. For others, you may want to write your scripts in such a fashion that it can pick up where the script left off when it runs the next time around. And with that, I am handing it back over to Katie.
Great. Thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciate that. I know that we covered a lot today, so at the end of all of these webinars, we like to leave you with 3 things to keep in mind when you leave. The first is AdWords scripts are a great tool to consider if you're looking for more flexibility than automated rules, but at the same time a tool that is simple and easy to use and get started with for people with basic JavaScript and programming experience. The second is the really exciting feature with AdWords scripts is that you can use data both from your AdWords account and beyond to inform your decisions. So you can bring your own data and business intuition into the changes that you're making to your AdWords account. And the final thing is, and I've even seen some of these questions come in already through the Q&A widget, is we're here to help you. You'll see within your console some links to the script site on developers.google.com. That link has a Getting Started guide, some great tutorials written by Kevin and his team, as well as a link to the forum, which is a great place to go if you have questions and want to interact with and get ideas from other people that are using AdWords scripts. So we definitely encourage you to take advantage of those help resources to get started. And now we're going to move over to the Q&A portion of our webinar. As with all of the webinars, there is a feedback survey that you can complete. We would love if you do this before you leave. We want to make these webinars and future webinars as useful as possible to you. Again, as I said at the beginning, we actually did this one as the result of feedback that we got from you about previous webinars. And we would really love to hear from you. So thank you very much for taking the time to complete the survey. And Kevin, it looks like we have some great questions coming in, so I'm just going to go through as many of these as I can before the top of the hour. To start off with, and I think that this is a great one and probably top of mind for a lot of people that manage large and multiple accounts or multiple clients, is it currently possible to manage clients? Is scripts essentially available at the MCC level at this time?
Okay. Currently, this is not possible, but it's definitely something we've heard a lot of feedback about, a lot of interest, and we're currently exploring how we might make this happen in the future.
Thank you. The second question is, somebody wanted to know if the sample scripts are available for download, for later review, or to adapt.
Sure. The sample scripts that are available in the UI are actually text boxes. You can select all the text and copy and paste it elsewhere to look at later. We also provide a large number of sample scripts on our documentation page that are available on the internet, and you can save them and reuse them as much as you want.
Great. The third question is it possible to create a script using an external application and not just from the web interface?
Is it possible to create a script via an API from external applications? Currently, the AdWords UI is the only place where scripts can be created. I hope that answers the question.
Great. And for the listener who asked that question, if you would like more details or clarification, just feel free to chat back in and we'll come back and answer that question in more detail. Somebody also wanted to know if there's a sandbox environment to test their scripts.
Currently, there is no sandbox environment. If you'd like to test your scripts, there's a couple of options. You could limit your script to only execute for a specific campaign or ad group that has been paused or disabled. Alternatively, what you could do is you could create an AdWords account that does not have billing information filled out, which will prevent ads from serving, and use that to experiment with your script.
Question here, and I think that this person hopefully will be happy with the answer. Can we use scripts without having to use external resources like spreadsheets?
Absolutely. In the quick example that I showed you at the end there, the only thing we use is the AdWords app object, which is only looking at your AdWords account data. There's no spreadsheet there. There's no external resource. We're just looking at the statistics available to us by querying for keywords and then making decisions based upon them.
Now, this is an interesting one. I know one thing that we talked about in the presentation today is the advantage of using scripts over some of our other tools, such as automated rules or the API. So can you explain a little bit about why someone may choose to use AdWords scripts instead of investing in building a larger, more robust tool using the AdWords API?
Sure. There are a couple of advantages of AdWords scripts over the API. The biggest one is simplicity. The AdWords scripts interface has been designed to be as simple as possible, whereas some of the operations in the AdWords API can be quite complex. The technologies involved with the AdWords API are also very, very complicated and sometimes can be difficult to get 100% correct. As a result, this has a high barrier to entry for the AdWords API. With AdWords scripts, it's a lot easier to get up and running. The other major benefit is that all of this stuff will be hosted by Google. So you write your script once, and it is hosted and run on Google servers. So you don't need to worry about maintaining or setting up a server or a schedule to make sure that your tasks are run when you want them. Google will take care of all the complicated pieces.
And if the person who chatted that in has more specific questions about the similarities and differences between the tools, feel free to write back in. We have a little bit of feedback here. Someone's interested to know if we're going to expand to search queries and site links or other ad extensions data. And I think that's great feedback. Kevin, do you have any insight into if and when that's happening, or is this something that we can take back to our team as feedback?
Yeah, I think that that's definitely something great to take back to our team. As I mentioned before, we implemented the 80% use case, or rather, as Katie mentioned, the 80% use case is the 80% most commonly used things. And things like search queries and site links, while they are widely used, are not really what a lot of people are actually making changes to on a daily basis. So those were things that have yet to be implemented. And we're always interested in hearing feedback from our advertisers to see what they really want implemented and what they really want to come out next. So a great thing to do is We'll take this feedback here, but if you have anything further after this webinar is over, please go to our forums and post and tell us what would you like to see next. And we definitely use that feedback when deciding the next feature to build.
Now we actually have a couple more technical questions. One is, can you apply different date range restrictions to different filters during the same selector?
Unfortunately, that is not possible. Right now, the way that all of the statistics work is that when you specify the date range, it simply uses that single date range to decide all the statistics questions when you're filtering with conditions. It's fairly complicated to handle multiple date ranges, and the Adwords API itself can't even do that right now.
Another technical question. What limits exist, and can we change as many keywords as we want? And I think that you went through this a little bit in the last slide. I know some of you on the call have experienced latency issues with some of the slides that you saw. And so for those who may not have seen that slide in the presentation, do you mind just going through again what the limits are, Kevin?
Sure. The limits are 30 minutes of execution time. So whatever your script is doing, it needs to be done by the end of 30 minutes or it will be halted. You can retrieve up to 100,000 entities, and that's a total number of entities. If you retrieve in a single iterator, you'll only be able to get 50,000 objects from that iterator. So two separate iterators could be used to get the total of 100,000. Within that time span, you could also create up to 100,000 keywords. However, we don't currently have a limit on the number of entities that you can modify. For example, if you're updating keyword bits. This is all documented on the developers.google.com site. So if you go there, you'll be able to see these limits in a little bit more detail.
And now someone's interested if you can walk through an example of retrieve a file from another source, so a fetch, as well as exporting data to another source.
Sure. Okay. For the first example, I actually recently published a tutorial showing how to do the exact use case you described here. It's the parameterize your ads tutorial, also available on the developers.google.com website, and it will retrieve a file from the United States Geological Survey, specifically dealing with earthquakes, and it uses this data, it processes the data in this file, and makes changes to the campaign, both which keywords are being used, as well as ad parameter values for each of these keywords in your campaign. So right now, the example of earthquake data is a fairly generic example. I don't really expect people to be advertising based upon earthquakes. But you could see that if you had a file somewhere, a feed from some other website that, for example, had your inventory available, you could do advertising. So each keyword advertised a different product, and you could use ad parameters that come along with this feed to insert the price and possibly also the quantity that you currently have in stock in your ad. And this allows for some very rich, really rich experience for viewers. As far as exporting your data to another source, we do have a couple of examples that are also tutorials on the developers.google.com site that explain how to use AdWords scripts to generate a report. The ad performance report, for example, actually goes and does an analysis on your ads based upon text in the headline and in the destination URL, and segments a report based upon these values. So you could do a A/B test, for example, against different headlines or different destination URLs, and it puts all of this data into a spreadsheet and then emails whoever you would like with a link to the spreadsheet. You could also simply accumulate this data in a text string and then insert that directly into the email, or you could include it as an attachment. Another option, and this requires a little bit more technical setup, is to perform an HTTP post using the URL fetch app and use your reporting data as the payload to send it to another web server. But that would require that you set up your web server to accept the incoming request.
For the user who chatted in that question, if you'd like any more details, definitely write back in and we'll be able to get back to you. But Kevin, thank you for going into so much detail as reminding people of the great tutorials that are available on the developer's website. Question here, can you use scripts to activate or pause ad groups based on inventory count pulled from a web page?
Yes, you can. You can absolutely go over, use an iterator over your ad groups, and then for each of your ad groups, check and say, does this have inventory? And if not, you can call adgroup.pause and pause that ad group. The inventory would have to be in some sort of a file that you can pull off of the web page, and then you can process that page to determine which counts correspond to which ad groups in your account. But that is absolutely doable.
I know we've talked a lot about limits. One thing we haven't clarified is what the limits apply to. For example, does it apply to a day, a particular script? Can you clarify exactly what the limits apply to?
Sure. The limits apply to a single execution of a single script. Currently, there are no limits that apply across all scripts or all clients. One limit that I did not mention but is documented on the code site is that you can only have 15 scripts authorized for a given user at a given time. So if you have a user connected to an MCC account and you log into a bunch of client accounts and create a script in each of them, you can only authorize one script at a time, one script times 15 across all of the accounts. So you may run into problems if you're trying to create a lot of individual scripts and run them. One of the ways to work around this is to create a new login email and use that second login to create additional scripts. We're currently working on increasing this by at least an order of magnitude, but unfortunately it requires some changes to the way that scripts are authorized that may take us a while to complete.
And I think that that's, again, a great example of questions coming in that are great feedback for our team. So we'll make sure to pass along any of the feedback we get from this webinar to the Scripts team, and we also encourage you to give that feedback in our forum as well. Here's an interesting question. Right now, this is a JavaScript program. Can you shed a little light as to whether other languages can be used or if that's something that you see happening in the future?
So the reason why JavaScript was chosen is because we already have a product called Google App Scripts, which allows you to use, again, the same environment that Adwords Scripts uses underneath to interact with a lot of other Google apps. For example, you can interact with the Calendar API, you can interact with Google Docs, you can create all sorts of different interactions. And so we're actually leveraging this framework to allow us to make these changes. If you wanted to if you absolutely had to use a different language, the Adwords API might be a better choice for you. We do provide client libraries in 6 different languages, including Java, C#, .NET, PHP, Perl, Python, etc. So if it's a language that you're concerned about, the Adwords API's client libraries may give you that flexibility. But for JavaScript, we chose it because we already have a great infrastructure in place allowing us to allow you to script and host it on our site.
Great, thank you. Another question coming in, is it possible to fetch and parse XML files?
Yes, it is. The URL fetch app can be used to retrieve the file, and there is a XML parsing utility that will give you a parsed XML file in response.
Great. We have another inventory question. I think people are really excited about the ability to use the third-party data, and they're just asking about a specific example. Can you use scripts to update text ads to include inventory count or minimum price from a specific web page?
Yes, you can. Using ad parameters, you can insert you can set special inserts. And if you actually look at the ad parameters example that I mentioned before, the tutorial goes into a lot of detail on how this can be used. But you can specify special markers in your ad text where a number will be inserted if a specific keyword is triggered. So as long as you can pull your inventory count and minimum price, etc., you can set those ad parameter values to reflect that. So it can be done.
Here's a question. Someone's looking for a little bit of an example. How can I use scripts to notify me if an account's available budget drops below a certain threshold?
Okay, so what you could do is you could set up a script to run, for example, a certain number of times. You could make it run daily, for example, 6 o'clock in the morning, and you could create a selector that gets all of your get all of your campaigns, and you could check the campaigns and check the cost that is incurred by that campaign, and then check that against the budget to find out how close are we to this campaign budget, and then send yourself an email if something is out or below your thresholds.
Here's an interesting question. Are there any JavaScript built-in functions, potentially disabled functions, that you would recommend that people not use?
So this is an emulated JavaScript environment. It's not the same as running it in a browser. So for example, you won't have things like the window or the document. But for the most part, basic built-in JavaScript, objects, functions, etc., will all work. You can play around. We haven't documented terribly all the details, but one thing you might want to do is check out the documentation for app scripts, Google app scripts, which may get into a little bit more detail about this environment. As I mentioned, we are reusing their infrastructure, so any limitations that are in place regarding things in JavaScript that you can use for them will also apply to us.
Another example someone's curious about, is it possible to create custom scripts that will track day over day? So for example, if CTR increases day over day for 3 days, can somebody write a script that raises bids by 5%?
Sure. There are two real ways of doing this. You can either, as you mentioned, keep track day over day, for example, by using a spreadsheet effectively as a database. And every day you run, you can record and say, okay, this ad group or this campaign had these statistics on this day, and then you can check the previous 2 or 3 days and see if it's changed enough that you want to increase your bids. The other option is you can actually get the stats for those 3 days in questions in the single script run, and then check for those 3 days, has your threshold been met, and if so, make changes to your bids. So there are a couple of different options you can use to make those to make that script work.
See a couple more questions coming in about scripts at the MCC level. Just to clarify, at this point, the scripts tool is available at the individual account level, not yet at the MCC level. It's an oft-requested enhancement to the tool and something that the team is aware of. We don't have any information at this time for if and when that may be available, but we really appreciate hearing that same feedback again. And like all of the feedback that you've shared during the Q&A session, we'll be bringing that back to the product team to let them know. So here's a great question, Kevin. Are scripts transactional? So is it possible to roll back changes if an error happens to occur midway through?
Unfortunately, scripts are not transactional at the moment. So if you, for example, were to be looking at an iterator and you were looping over all of the keywords, and for each one you do some action, and for one of the keywords, let's say that there is a problem with your script, maybe you have a bug or whatever, unfortunately, there's the keyword changes that have occurred will be committed. Now, there are some caveats to this. We do batch and try to apply these changes in groupings. So it won't always happen that if you make one change and then the second one errors that the keyword will happen. But if you're dealing with several thousand or a very large amount, you will probably have the bulk of the earlier ones occur. One of the great things to do when you're writing an iterator is to set conditions in the iterator that will exclude it if you ever had to run it a second time. This is also a strategy that you can use to deal with very, very large accounts with millions of keywords, because you cannot currently execute over millions of keywords with the scripts. You would have to write a condition in your selector to skip over the ones that you've already processed. So if you write your scripts in this fashion, you can also handle the case that you ran into an error one execution, and then the next time it runs, it'll pick up where it left off.
Great. And I think along the same lines, Is there actually a script that you can write that will undo changes?
So as far as undo changes, there's no automatic way to undo changes. Unfortunately, that is one downside of AdWords scripts compared to rules. There's no automatic undo feature. However, it is potentially possible for you to create the antidote script to your first script, a script that effectively does the exact opposite and undoes any of the changes that happened. But as I mentioned, it's currently not possible to automatically do that.
This is an interesting question. I know that we've mentioned a number of times automated rules and scripts. We were just talking about that. If somebody's running automated rules and then they write scripts, how do the two interact with each other?
That's a good question. Right now, they will interact with each other the same way that multiple rules or multiple scripts would interact with one another. They will run individually, and they'll look at the view as they're seeing it from the database. So when you run your rule, it might make changes, and then if your script runs later, you'll see those changes, but they're not necessarily going to interact over one another. In general, if you're trying to run two of them at once, due to the latency involved in running a script or executing a rule, you might want to spread these executions out. So you run your script at one time and you run something else, say, half an hour later, just to make sure they don't overlap, because it's hard to predict exactly when parts of your script will run compared to another rule or another script.
I think that that's an excellent question. I think it's a really good best practice to keep in mind with any of the automated tools. And I think one thing to remember as well is it could even be the same thing with what happens if you're running automated rules or making manual changes to your account as well. And all of these things are going to be happening, and so you just need to be very sensitive to the timing in which they're happening and what the account looks like at the time that the rule or the script is going to be running, since the changes will be made based on what the account looks like at that point in time. So for the listener that asked that, thank you very much, and I think that that's a great best practice to remind people about. So Kevin, I know a lot of people have asked about the MCC. I think we have a lot of people on the call here who are managing large accounts and multiple accounts. What would be a good recommendation if people wanted to run the same script between more than one account, knowing that right now the tool is at an individual account level?
So unfortunately, we don't have a great answer to this question. As I said, we're trying to investigate the best way we can approach this and the best way we can make this happen. Right now, the only real option is to create the script and put it individually into your individual accounts and either schedule them or have somebody go in and run them. Once you start dealing with a very large number of accounts, scheduling scripts becomes very, very useful. So for right now, we don't have a good answer, but we are looking into it.
Let's see. We have lots of questions coming in here. I'm hoping we're able to get through all of them in the next 9 minutes. Here's an interesting one about using external data again. Is it possible to integrate external conversion data?
So I'm not extremely familiar with external conversion data. However, I would like to point out that if you can retrieve this data from a web source, such as an actual HTML page or a text file that's on another server, you should be able to integrate it the same that you would any other data. I would need a little bit more information about the specific external conversion data you're talking about, but if it's in a format that you can work with inside the script, you should be able to integrate it as if it were something other than conversion data. You know, it's really just a lot of numbers and then tying it together to what it means to your scripts, to your account, and how you want to make changes.
And for that listener, if you'd like to write back in with a more specific question, if we have time, we'll be happy to answer that. And I think looking at the list of questions, we may not be able to get to everybody's. Definitely continue writing in, and what we can do is email each of you individually afterwards. So we'll try and do the best that we can to get answers to you, whether we do it during the call or do it via text. So definitely continue to write in. Here's another one. Is it possible to select keywords on a basis of since last change instead of given over date range or over a given date range?
So I'm just reading this question really quickly. So we're talking about changing the bid of a keyword. Unfortunately, the time that a keyword's bid was modified is not available in the in AdWords scripts, the API, or as far as I know, the UI. This piece of information just is not exposed, and therefore it's not possible to write a query like that.
Here's some interesting feedback. Any plans for a point-and-click script creator, kind of like a macro recording, so that we can just check the code later?
That's a very interesting question. That's actually similar to other requests we've had, which were to start with a rule and then convert that into the script equivalent so you can use a rule as a starting base. That's a really interesting concept. I'm definitely going to have to bring that back to the team. But right now, we don't have any current plans to build something like that. Good suggestion.
Here's an interesting question. I think it may have been asked before, but just to clarify, can we use all JavaScript functions or just a subset?
Sure. So you can use any built-in JavaScript functions, things like the math functions, for example. But again, you won't be able to use anything from the window or things that are browser specific. Anything that's a core part of JavaScript should be usable. And again, I would recommend using the AppScript documentation for a little bit more detail on this.
So looking through the questions here, here's a good one. For using external data, does it have to be in a Google spreadsheet?
No, actually, that you do not need it to be in a Google spreadsheet. A Google spreadsheet is just one of the ways that you can access it. You could definitely use a file, but again, the only way to integrate files other than spreadsheets with your application is to retrieve them using URL fetch. So if this file is hosted on your company's website, you should be able to do a URL fetch to that file and retrieve it and then make changes to it. You could also theoretically send this file back to your server if your server was configured to receive such an upload. But no, you don't have to use Google Scripts. But it does. I'm sorry, Google Spreadsheets. But it does make certain things easier, such as you could upload your inventory data, manage it in Google Spreadsheets, and then your script will just always see stuff up to date there.
A question again about the type of support that's available to developers for scripts. That's a question that I can answer. The first is we have the forum, which Kevin is an active part of. He's an amazing resource from the developer relations team, so we strongly encourage you to participate in that. And again, this is again another plug for completing the survey. If there's a strong desire for additional training, we do have the opportunity to run webinars either through the Learn with Google program or for more advanced developers through Google Developers Live, which is something that's hosted off of our developers website. So definitely put in your feedback if you're looking for additional types of training or support, and we'll keep those in mind and make sure that they're available. So again, the survey is a great way to give any kind of feedback, whether it be on this webinar or what type of resources you would like in the future. So thank you very much for asking that. So it looks like somebody has actually been playing around with scripts during the course of this call and has a particular question on the preview. So in the preview, what they experienced is that it says it will not send an email or update spreadsheets, but then once they clicked preview, they received an email. So can you clarify a little bit about the experience that this user may have just had?
Sure. So when you click preview, what it does is it simulates running the script. And what it will do is every time you're trying to create or make a change to something, it'll record that instead of actually making the change. So then later when you go to, so that later at the end of the script, we can display a summary of what would have occurred. And it only does this for approximately 30 seconds. So just to give you an idea of what would change in the script. If the text says that it won't send email or make changes to scripts, we should definitely update that because it's only going to be emulating AdWords changes when you're running a script. Any sort of emails or manipulations of spreadsheets will actually occur during a preview. So we should definitely double check that to make sure it's clear.
We only have about 3 minutes left on this call, so we'll take a couple more questions, and then again, for any that we may not have been able to answer, we'll make sure to get those individuals' answers. And maybe, Kevin, if there are some common ones, is there a way that we'd actually be able to post some of them on the forum and start threads so that we can continue the conversation in another format?
Sure. Actually, I think that this would probably be a great resource to find a bunch of FAQ questions that we can put in on the code site, the developers.google.com site, as part of our documentation.
Great. Thanks a lot. So I know that this has come up a couple of times, but it's a pretty common question, so something that I think is worth reiterating. How often can scripts run or do scripts run? So for people who want to schedule them, what are the different ways that they can schedule them at this time?
Sure. So the frequency is day, week, or month. As far as when the script will run during that time period, you can specify up to a specific hour for it to run, and will run at some point during that hour. Currently, we don't have an ability to specify to happen during a certain minutes or certain seconds within an hour, just due to system load concerns. But that is something that we are looking to enhance. Several people have requested that we provide the ability to run scripts hourly, and we're investigating to see if that would be possible.
And so with that, I think that we do need to wrap this up. I